It always starts the same way. A sudden jolt in the middle of the night, a racing heart, sweat dripping down the forehead, and the echo of flames still burning in the back of the mind. A grown adult who hasn't stepped inside a church for years wakes up gasping from a nightmare of hell. Not because they believe anymore, but because the belief left scars. This is the part religion rarely talks about. The way doctrines follow you long after you've stopped believing them. The way fear lingers in the nervous system, as if your body never got the memo that your mind has moved on. People assume leaving religion is like flipping a switch. One day you believe, the next day you don't. But anyone who's lived it knows it's not that simple. The conditioning doesn't leave when you leave the church. It hides in your dreams. It hijacks your choices. It whispers in your moments of silence. Because this isn't just about hurt feelings. It's about trauma. Measurable, real, psychological trauma. The kind that rewires the brain, that scripts fear and shame into childhood and refuses to let go. And if this already hits close to home, tap subscribe. This channel is your deprogramming toolkit, because what we're talking about isn't theory. It's a nightmare that doesn't end when you stop believing. It's the shadow religion leaves behind. So what do we call this thing? This weight that lingers even after the belief is gone. Psychologists have given it a name: religious trauma. And let's be clear, this isn't just about disagreeing with a pastor or deciding you don't like church anymore. It's not the same as losing interest in a hobby or switching political parties. Religious trauma is something deeper, something heavier. It's what happens when systems of belief are enforced with fear, with shame, and with the constant threat of eternal consequences. When every thought, every action, every desire has been policed under the banner of God's will. The symptoms don't look like a casual falling out with faith. They look like nightmares, like panic attacks, like flashbacks that come out of nowhere. They look like post-traumatic stress disorder, because in many ways, that's exactly what they are. And yet, how often do we hear the dismissal? Oh, you're just bitter. You're just hurt. As if the problem is simply emotional sensitivity. But the science says otherwise. Therapists see the same patterns again and again, no matter the denomination, no matter the country. Anxiety, depression, guilt so heavy it feels like chains. Not because people failed at religion, but because religion itself trained their nervous system to live in fear. This is why naming the wound matters. Because when we call it what it is, trauma, suddenly the fog clears. It's not weakness. It's not overreaction. It's the predictable outcome of authoritarian control dressed up as divine truth. And once you see it for what it is, you can finally begin the process of undoing it. For many people, the story begins in childhood. Before they could even tie their shoes, they were told they were broken, born sinful, unworthy, in need of saving from the moment they took their first breath. And layered on top of that, the warning that they were never truly alone, because someone was always watching. Not Santa Claus, not a parent in the next room, but an all-seeing, all-knowing God. Imagine being 5 years old and believing that every stray thought, every flicker of curiosity, every mistake could land you in eternal fire. That isn't faith. That's surveillance. And the body responds. The nervous system learns to stay on high alert. Heart racing, shoulders tense, mind scanning for danger, inside your own head. Years later, even after leaving religion, those circuits don't just switch off. The programming sticks. A casual thought spirals into guilt. A simple decision feels paralyzing. Because what if it's the wrong one? What if the invisible judge is still taking notes? This is why so many adults raised in strict religions describe a constant hum of anxiety. Not just fear of doing wrong, but fear of being wrong. And it's why the imprint is so hard to shake. When a child's developing brain is wired to equate love with obedience and safety with submission, the patterns don't disappear when the doctrine does. The fear follows, the shame lingers, and the invisible eyes that once watched from heaven stay burned into the mind long after belief has faded. Hell is not just a theological idea. For millions, it's a conditioning tool. A story told to keep behavior in line, using the most basic human fear, pain and annihilation. Picture the images children were shown: mouths of fire, endless torment, a sky full of judgment. It's dramatic by design, because fear that vivid sticks. That image of endless burning does two things. First, it creates an instant visceral response. The amygdala lights up, the body rehearses escape. Second, it teaches a simple rule: obedience or agony. This is operant conditioning dressed as doctrine. Do the right thing, earn safety. Do the wrong thing, earn eternal punishment. Years later, the logic doesn't vanish with belief. The brain still remembers the contingency. So, even after someone has intellectually rejected the idea of hell, the body can react as if it's real. Nightmares, sudden sweats, a chorus line of intrusive images that arrive uninvited. I've spoken to people who are proudly non-religious, rational, skeptical, who still flinch at a hymn, who pause when a sermon's cadence creeps into their headphones, who avoid church bells, not out of piety, but because the sound triggers a flashback to fear. One woman told me she dreamed of falling into fire every time she argued with a partner, years after leaving her church. A man said the smell of incense made his palms sweat, because incense had always been paired with warnings about sin. Those are not isolated anecdotes. They're patterns. They are the fingerprints of a system that weaponized imagery to control behavior. Contrast that with claims of divine love. The same institutions that promise comfort are often the ones manufacturing terror to enforce obedience. Love, in this setup, becomes conditional. Obey me, and I will withhold the horror. That contradiction, comfort on the surface, terror underneath, is what makes hell such an effective psychological weapon. It's not a harmless metaphor. For many, it's a live trauma, a trigger that survives belief and keeps people chained to fear long after the sermons stop. In many religious environments, survival means splitting yourself in two. There's the version you put on display: the smiling, obedient, prayerful self that never questions, never strays, never doubts. And then there's the private self, hungry for answers, curious, flawed, human. The system rewards the first and punishes the second. So you learn to perform holiness like a role in a play. Every word rehearsed, every action carefully staged, every thought edited before it escapes. But behind the curtain, the real you is still there, afraid, guilty, and constantly scanning for cracks in the performance. That split takes a toll. It breeds cognitive dissonance, a mental tug of war where one side clings to authenticity and the other demands survival. The tension is exhausting. And when the mask slips, when you act on desire or admit to doubt, the cycle of shame begins. Confession, repentance, tears at the altar. then a promise to be better, only to break again. Round and round it goes. This is why so many former believers describe years of living as imposters in their own lives. Not because they wanted to lie, but because honesty was punished. When people on the outside say, just be authentic, they miss the point. Authenticity wasn't an option. It was rebellion. It was dangerous, and the damage lingers. Even after leaving religion, many carry the instinct to hide parts of themselves, to edit their truth before speaking, to keep performing long after the stage is gone. That's the cruelty of it. Religion teaches you to split yourself in half, then shames you for feeling broken. Purity culture. Two words that sound harmless until you realize the weight they carry. At its core, purity culture is about control. Purity pledges. Rings that symbolize ownership. Rules about skirts, shoulders, eye contact. Entire sermons dedicated to policing what bodies can and cannot do. Desire itself becomes a courtroom. Every thought, every glance, every touch is cross-examined. Was it holy enough? Was it sinful? And the verdict is always the same: guilty. Young people are taught that their worth is tied to sexual status, that purity is currency, and once it's spent, you can never get it back. The message is burned in early. If you fail, you are the failure. Not just your actions, your entire identity. And what happens next? Intimacy becomes terrifying. Guilt follows people into their marriages, into their bedrooms, into the quiet moments where love should feel safe. Instead, every kiss echoes with accusation. Every touch is shadowed by shame. I've heard countless stories. Adults who panic at the idea of physical closeness. Couples who can't connect without waves of guilt. People who disassociate from their own bodies because desire was labeled dirty from the start. This is not just bad teaching, it's trauma. When your body is framed as both a temptation and a trap, you learn to live outside of it, to police it, to fear it, and the fallout is lifelong. Because purity culture doesn't just ask for obedience, it asks for self-erasure. And when you grow up erasing parts of yourself, it takes years, sometimes decades, to remember that your body was never the enemy. In many religious systems, obedience isn't just encouraged, it's exalted, the highest virtue. Children are praised for compliance. Adults are honored for submission. And questioning authority isn't framed as curiosity, it's framed as rebellion. The message is clear. Trust the leaders, not yourself. Trust the pastor. Trust the elder. Trust the so-called divine order. Your own judgment? Dangerous, flawed, sinful. And over time, that training does something profound. It hijacks agency. You stop making choices. You wait for permission. You second-guess every instinct because you've been told instincts can't be trusted. This doesn't just affect faith. It bleeds into everything. Career paths stall because you're afraid to step outside God's will. Relationships suffer because you were never taught how to assert your needs. Workplaces and even politics feel familiar when authority figures demand blind loyalty because you were conditioned to obey long before. And here's the trap. Obedience feels safe. It shields you from punishment, but the cost is steep. You lose the muscle of self-trust. You lose the ability to act without someone else's blessing. That's the quiet damage of authoritarian religion. It doesn't just take your Sundays, it takes your agency, and it leaves you waiting for someone else to live your life for you. Leaving religion isn't just about changing your mind. It's about losing your world. For many, The moment they step away, the doors slam shut. Family stops calling. Friends vanish overnight. Entire communities cut them off, not with argument, but with silence. This isn't coincidence. It's structural. A built-in punishment for dissent. Because if leaving means losing everything you love, fewer people will risk it. The result feels like social death. One day, you're embraced as part of the flock. The next, you're treated like a ghost. And the grief cuts deep, not just for the faith you left behind, but for the people who once felt like home. Some describe it like re-entry shock, like veterans returning from war, only to find the world they come back to feels alien. The language, the rituals, the social cues, they all feel foreign. And you're left standing between two worlds, not fully belonging to either. Loneliness, in this context, isn't a phase. It's a design, a way to enforce conformity by making outsiders pay the highest possible price. I've heard countless stories. Mothers who will no longer hug their children. Siblings who refuse to speak. Entire towns that treat an ex-believer like a contagion. And the message behind it is unmistakable. If you question, you lose everything. If you doubt, you are disposable. This is the exit wound of leaving religion. Not just the loss of belief, but the loss of belonging. And it's why so many describe the pain of leaving as worse than the pain of staying. Money was never just money inside the system. It was faith in action. It was obedience with a dollar sign. Week after week, the basket passed. Not giving enough? That was a test of loyalty. Skipping a tithe? That was robbing God. And the pressure worked. Because who wants divine punishment hanging over their paycheck? Then came the televangelists, the prosperity gospel preachers, promising blessings in exchange for donations. If you sow the seed, God will multiply it back to you. For many, it never multiplied. The only thing that grew was the pastor's mansion, the church's budget, the empire built on fear and hope. And yet the guilt lingered. People learned to equate financial struggle with spiritual failure. If money was tight, maybe they hadn't given enough. If debt piled up, maybe they weren't faithful enough. That mindset doesn't vanish easily. Even after leaving religion, survivors describe budget anxiety, scarcity fears, and shame whenever they keep money for themselves. Because the betrayal cuts deep. They gave, believing it would help the needy. But the truth? It built empires, not safety nets. That's the prosperity trap. A system where devotion is measured in dollars. And the only ones who prosper are the ones collecting them. Inside dogma, questioning was never curiosity. It was sin. Doubt wasn't a path to knowledge. It was rebellion. So you learn to silence the voice that asks why. You swallow your instincts. You memorize answers instead of searching for them. And slowly, the muscle of critical thought atrophies. When people finally leave, they often find themselves in unfamiliar territory. Books they were once forbidden to read. Ideas that were once labeled dangerous. Even simple questions feel risky. It's a strange kind of rehab, learning how to think again. Not what to think, how to think. The steps are awkward at first. Testing evidence instead of relying on authority. Practicing media literacy instead of trusting only one narrative. Building a reading list, not from what's approved, but from what sparks curiosity. And with every page, every documentary, every debate, something stirs. The brain wakes up. The curiosity that was buried under doctrine begins to breathe again. It's exhilarating, but also unsettling. Because freedom means uncertainty, and uncertainty feels dangerous when you've been told certainty is the only safety. But this is the heart of recovery. Not just rejecting false answers, but relearning how to seek real ones, unlearning the script of obedience, and replacing it with the courage to think for yourself. Let's zoom in. 3 people, 3 different systems, same wound underneath. First, an ex-evangelical woman in her 30s. She left purity culture years ago, but the flashbacks never left her. Every time intimacy begins, her body seizes with guilt. It's not that she believes anymore. She doesn't. But the script of shame still lives inside her skin. Second, a man who walked away from a high-control sect. The day he left, his phone went silent. No more calls from family. No more friends inviting him over. He says it felt like being erased while still alive. Not because he changed as a person, but because he dared to change his belief. Third, a survivor of fundamentalist Islam. Another of fundamentalist Christianity. Both tell the same story. The sound of prayer, the echo of a hymn, the call from a minaret or a church bell triggers panic. Not because the sound itself is dangerous, but because it was paired over and over with threats of hell and eternal judgment. Different religions, different doctrines, but the fingerprints match. Fear, control, shame. These aren't isolated experiences. They're case files in a global pattern. Proof that authoritarian religion, no matter the label, leaves the same marks on the human psyche. Fear doesn't just shape beliefs, it reshapes the brain. When you grow up under constant threat, hell, sin, divine punishment, the fear circuits in your brain go into overdrive. The amygdala, the part that scans for danger, becomes hypersensitive. It learns to fire at the slightest spark. Meanwhile, the part of the brain that handles logic and decision-making, the prefrontal cortex, gets pushed aside. It's like living with a smoke alarm that never turns off, drowning out the quieter voice of reason. That's why triggers persist even after belief is gone. A hymn, a verse, a sermon cadence. It doesn't matter if you no longer agree with it. The body reacts as if the danger is still real, because for years it was trained to. But here's the good news. Brains can rewire. Neuroplasticity means change is possible. Slow, but possible. Recovery often looks like small steps. Creating safe environments. Facing triggers in manageable doses. Learning self-compassion instead of self-condemnation. With time, the overactive alarm quiets. The brain relearns that doubt isn't deadly, that questions aren't punishable, that safety is possible without submission. The scars may remain, but the circuits can heal. And for many survivors, that healing is the first real taste of freedom. So what does healing actually look like? Not a quick fix, not a single breakthrough moment, but a toolkit, a process. For many, the first step is therapy, specifically trauma-informed therapy. Not someone who tells you to pray harder, not someone who dismisses your past, but a professional who understands how authoritarian systems shape the nervous system. The second step is community. Because if religion isolated you, recovery has to reconnect you. Secular or agnostic support groups, online forums, meetups, places where your story isn't met with judgment, but with recognition, where someone nods and says, "Yes, me too." Then there are personal practices. Journaling, for example, becomes a way to reclaim your own voice, to write without censoring, without confessing, without fear, to let your private self breathe on the page. And boundaries, maybe the hardest step of all. Learning to say, "No, I won't discuss this with you." Or, "If you treat me this way, I will walk away." Scripts that protect your sanity when family or old communities try to pull you back into obedience. Healing isn't about being anti-faith. It's about being pro-autonomy, pro-sanity. It's about rebuilding a life where fear isn't the guiding principle. Because the opposite of trauma isn't belief. It's freedom. The freedom to think, to feel, and to choose for yourself. One of the biggest fears drilled into believers is this: without God, morality collapses. Without Scripture, life has no meaning. But step outside the rulebook, and something surprising happens. You discover that morality doesn't require divine surveillance. It requires empathy. It requires asking, does this action reduce harm? Does it create well-being? Does it make the world more livable for others? That's not good without God. That's just good, measured not by obedience, but by outcomes. And meaning? It doesn't have to be handed down from the clouds. It can be crafted through science and discovery, through art and creation, through relationships that matter and service that leaves the world a little better than you found it. No cosmic permission slip required. This is the experiment of rebuilding, not waiting for purpose to be assigned, but daring to create it, not fearing you'll get it wrong, but embracing the freedom to explore. And maybe that's the ultimate reversal. Religion told you meaning was given. But the truth is, meaning was always yours to make. Remember that nightmare we started with? The fire, the fear, the sudden jolt awake. Here's the truth. That dream isn't destiny. It's residue. It's data left over from years of conditioning. Yes, there's grief for the time lost, for the childhood spent afraid, for the years spent split in two. But there's also something else: agency. The power to reclaim your voice, your choices, your life. You are not broken for leaving. You are brave for surviving. And if this journey resonates with you, share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to know they're not alone. Share this video with them. Be the voice you once needed. And subscribe for more deep dive deprogramming, live discussions, and a community built on freedom, not fear. Because the scars don't define you. The story you write next does.